By the South African Human Rights Commission, and we're joined via Skype by the Human Rights Commission spokesperson, Gail Smith. Gail, thank you for being with us. The question is always, is there more racism, or as a society are we more outraged by racism, more readily, more keen to expose racism, I guess?
Good evening, and good evening to your viewers. I think the important thing is that there needs to be a recognition that race is a function of inequality. And what our trends analysis report has shown, and our investigations in human rights have shown, is that there's an increase in inequality in South Africa. Race is one of the grounds for inequality in this country. So it's not necessarily that racism is getting worse, it's that inequality is pervasive, and that race is one of the grounds of inequality in the country.
But can you confirm you are getting more complaints that are race-related?
Actually, if you'd read the report, you would see that we had actually said that with respect to inequality, race is the highest ground. However, we've actually seen a drop from 505 race-based complaints last year to 486 the year before, to 486 this year. So we've actually seen a drop down in race-related matters.
Most complaints are around, like you say, the right to equality, next healthcare, food, social security. How do you deal with those sort of rights, complaints in a country where we know we have a shortage of beds in hospitals, pit latrines in some schools, things like that?
Well, I mean, it's not our job to fix the situation. Our job is to monitor the situation, to do, interventions where complaints are brought to us. We are tasked with ensuring that there's a culture of human rights and that human rights are protected in the country. South Africans and people who live in the Republic are entitled to equality rights. They're entitled to health, food, water, social security, etc. And where the Commission finds that these rights are being violated, what we do is we then approach the relevant and significant authorities who are responsible for the provision of basic services to ensure that those services are then delivered to the people who are entitled to those rights.
How far does your enforcement capabilities go? You say you have to go to the relevant authorities. I mean, so racial issues will land up in the courts. Some complaints that we still only have the crime and crimen injuria law dealing with those complaints.
Well, criminal injuries it doesn't fall within our purview. That's not within the purview of the South African Human Rights Commission. So those are criminal.
I'm asking for your opinion. Sure.
I'm just explaining. We don't speak on crime and injury because it's a criminal matter. It's not for the Human Rights Commission. We take matters to the equality courts. We don't go to the criminal courts with respect. Criminal matters are dealt with in different courts to the cases that we deal with.
Could you lobby for harsher laws around race? That's what some people are calling for.
Well, we could, but that's not our constitutional mandate. Our mandate is partly to create a culture of respect for human rights. So our approach is always that we would rather have a social cohesion being built where people actually understand what their human rights are, and where people do violate each other's rights, that we can bring them together and help them to understand where the violation would occur. So ours is very much, we're not necessarily, we do have powers, punitive powers, but in the first instance, we do not want to use those punitive powers, even though we do have them, because the courts, as we stand, are completely overburdened with a whole range of criminal matters. What would be the outcome of sending more race-based complaints to an already overburdened court system? So with respect to the criminalization of race-based complaints, the Human Rights Commission feels that there are courts that can deal with this. Equality courts are free and everyone can approach the equality court, but we don't necessarily see the solution lying in being more punitive and sending people to jail. And we're not necessarily sure that that will build a culture of human rights, where we are inclined to use alternative dispute resolution mechanisms to try to get people to meet one another halfway. Obviously, where rights have been so egregiously violated, we will go to to the courts to seek relief on behalf of complainants who come to us.
Ms. Smith, we're hearing that there have been complaints laid against Andile Itama. I think recently saying that if one black person is killed, 5 white people will be killed, something that as very racially based. For those who don't know the functioning of the Human Rights Commission, just explain how you will now deal with those complaints.
Well, we have a complaints handling procedure. So there are a couple of complaints that we would not necessarily take. If something has already gone to court and is before a court, because we respect the courts, we will not take on that complaint. Where it falls within the purview of the South African Human Rights Commission, where it's a violation of the Bill of Rights, or, equality rights inside of the Constitution, and there is prima facie evidence at face value that a human right has been violated, we would then take on the complaint. After that, we would contact the parties, because people do have a right to reply. And after that, then the relevant officer who has taken on the complaint will have to make a decision as to whether this is something that the Commission deals with, or if we go to court, or if we pass it on to another body that is tasked with managing that.
Do you have any sort of preliminary comment around this specific issue? I don't know if you saw his speech.
We're aware of it. I don't have any comment on that. I think it would be woefully inappropriate. The complaints came in this morning, and I think we do need to give our colleagues a chance to assess the complaints that they've received and to decide which way they want to act on this.
Finally, Ms. Smith, you've been doing this trends report since 2013. I did look at it a lot about your internal functioning, but tell us in terms of South African attitudes, what does it tell you has changed over time, and where do you see this going sort of in light of the rise of fascism globally, the backlash against immigration? How do we fit into that global context?
I think South Africa is very much part of a global family that is really battling with social cohesion as a consequence of social media. Yeah, I think that Germany is having very similar problems. I think, globally there are issues with discrimination that are happening all around the world. And we're having very similar issues in South Africa to other countries. We're not necessarily an exception. What the Trends Analysis Report is showing us, having done them over 5 consecutive years, firstly, we are seeing a spike in the numbers of complaints that we are dealing with, which would to us indicate that people are aware of their rights. So our advocacy and our outreach work are having a success because people are aware of their rights. Rights knowledge is the first step in rights assertion. When people don't know their rights, they can't complain about their rights. So we take some comfort in the higher workload that we're seeing because we think it indicates that more people understand what their rights are. The other thing that we see very, very clearly, and it's laid out in our Constitution and it's laid out in our Equality Act, which both say the inequality and the social and political and economic issues that we face as a country, they are systemic, they are structural, and they require systemic and structural responses. And you see that in the fact that the equality rights, the health, food, and social security rights are being violated, and that people are not accessing the rights that they are entitled to. So that they are structural, they are deep structural inequality issues that do need to be addressed in our country. The issue is not just about racial discrimination. Race is one of many grounds. All of us are more than just a race. You're a race, you're a gender, you have a certain economic status, and all of these things matter. So our rights intersect across all of those. And while it's important to focus on race, it's equally important that people do understand that even if we did away with all racial discrimination in the country, we would still not have the kind of country that our Constitution envisages if people with disabilities, if women, if people of different ethnic origins are discriminated against. If that continues, we would not be achieving what our Constitution envisaged for South Africa. Racial harmony is not the only prerequisite for a successful constitutional democracy such as ours. Our Constitution is very, very clear about what equality means in the context of South Africa.
All right, we appreciate your time this evening and that explanation. Spokesperson for the South African Human Rights Commission, Gail Smith. Shante?